It was a Monday evening in downtown Chicago, a night that felt like it belonged in a movie script. The streets buzzed with late-night traffic, neon lights flashing against wet pavement, and people rushing home after a long day. Nobody expected anything unusual to happen. Nobody expected danger to lurk just one street away from the glowing high-rise towers. But that's exactly where the story you're about to hear began. A billionaire, yes, a man who could buy anything he wanted, chose to take a shortcut through an alley he had no business walking into. His name was Mr. Harrington, one of the richest investors in America. He was the kind of man who made headlines with every business move, praised by some, hated by others. But on this night, none of that mattered. In that alley, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man, and a target. Two shadows emerged from the darkness. They weren't random criminals. These men had been waiting. They knew who he was. They knew what he carried. And they knew this was their chance. With every step Mr. Harrington took, the trap closed tighter. The taller one grabbed him first, shoving him against a graffiti-covered wall. The second pulled out a knife, its edge catching the dim light. "Hand it over," one of them hissed. His expensive watch, his wallet, and maybe even his life. Everything was on the line. Now, before I go deeper, I want you, the listener, to pause and think. How does a man worth billions end up cornered like this? How fragile does wealth look when no bodyguards are around, no luxury cars, no towering gates to protect him? Right here, in this moment, money was worthless. Mr. Harrington tried to reason with them, his voice shaking. But reasoning wasn't part of their plan. One man punched him, the other pressed the knife closer. Blood trickled down his lip. And here's where fate stepped in, through the most unlikely hero. A 6-year-old boy named Malik. He lived just a block away, in a cramped apartment with his mother. That night, he was outside tossing around an old, beat-up ball, something his mom always told him not to do after dark. But kids don't always listen. Malik's ball bounced off a brick, rolled into the very alley where two grown men were beating down a billionaire. The moment the boy stepped into that scene, history shifted. He didn't know who Mr. Harrington was. He didn't care about money, power, or titles. All he saw was a man being hurt. And with a ball in his small hands, Malik prepared to do something no one would believe. Remember this. Sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest in the darkest hours. Sometimes courage doesn't come from those in suits and ties, but from a child holding nothing but a ball. This was no ordinary night. And what Malik did next would change lives, stir controversy, and expose truths that even Mr. Harrington himself had tried to bury. So lean in, because the alley wasn't just a place of violence. It became the starting point of a storm that would soon sweep across the city, leaving everyone asking, how could a child outsmart men twice his size? And why was this billionaire even there to begin with? Malik was only 6, but that night, he didn't move like a child. His tiny hands gripped the ball like it was a weapon. His wide eyes caught every detail, the way the knife gleamed, the way Mr. Harrington's body slumped, the way the attacker's shadows towered like monsters. Fear could have frozen him, but it didn't. Instead, something inside Malik lit up, the same fire his late father once carried. You see, Malik's dad had been a local basketball player before tragedy struck. He never made it to the big leagues, but he taught Malik one thing. Son, when you throw that ball, aim like your life depends on it. Those words echoed now. Malik lifted the ball, his little heart pounding like a drum. The taller attacker didn't notice him at first. He was too busy holding Mr. Harrington down. But then, whack, the ball slammed against his temple with a force no one expected from such a small arm. The man cursed, stumbling back, his grip loosening. The second man spun around. What the? His eyes fell on the boy. A child. Just a child. He laughed for a split second, but that laugh ended when Malik threw again, this time straight at the knife. The ball smacked his wrist, knocking the blade loose. The clatter echoed in the alley louder than any siren. Think about that for a second. A 6-year-old disarmed a grown man, Not with guns, not with muscle, but with a ball. Unbelievable? Maybe. But real life has a way of delivering shocks no Hollywood script can match. Mr. Harrington, gasping for breath, seized his chance. He shoved one man aside and staggered to his feet. But Malik wasn't done. He picked up his ball again, ready for another throw if needed. His little chest rose and fell like he'd just run a marathon, but his eyes held no fear. The attackers, stunned by what just happened, backed away. They hadn't planned for this. Their victim was supposed to be easy prey. They weren't prepared for a child to turn the fight upside down. One muttered, "This isn't worth it," and they bolted into the night, disappearing into the maze of streets. Silence followed. Only the sound of Mr. Harrington's heavy breathing and Malik's soft footsteps filled the air. The billionaire leaned against the wall, his expensive suit torn, his face bruised. He looked at Malik, confused, grateful, but also unsettled. "Kid, who are you?" Malik just shrugged. "I'm Malik. I just didn't want them to hurt you." Simple words, innocent words, but they carried more weight than Harrington could handle. In that moment, the man who owned skyscrapers, companies, and private jets felt smaller than the boy who had just saved him. And yet, here's where things start to twist. Because while the city would eventually call Malik a hero, not everyone would celebrate him. Some would question why a child was even outside that late. Some would whisper about Mr. Harrington's secrets. Why was he in that alley in the first place? What was he hiding? The rescue was real, but so were the questions. And as the story spread, those questions would spark tension, love, betrayal, and a storm of controversy. But remember, this was only the beginning. The alley grew quiet again, but the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows a gunshot, heavy and sharp, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Malik stood there, clutching his ball, his small chest rising and falling like a runner at the finish line. Beside him, Mr. Harrington wiped blood from his mouth with a trembling hand. He wasn't used to being touched, let alone attacked. In his world, people bowed, smiled, and did whatever it took to be in his favor. Tonight had stripped all of that away. For the first time in decades, he was just a man trying to survive. "Kid," Harrington muttered, voice cracking, "you saved my life." But Malik didn't answer right away. He was staring at the knife still lying in the alley, its silver edge glinting faintly under the flickering streetlight. His young mind was trying to make sense of what just happened. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt different. Before either of them could move, the wail of a siren echoed in the distance. Harrington stiffened. Most men in his position would welcome the police, but not him. Not tonight. "Come on," he said quickly, grabbing Malik's hand. "We need to get out of here before they show up." Now pause and think about that. Why would a billionaire, a man with nothing to fear from the law, be so desperate to avoid them? What was he hiding that made him flinch at the sound of sirens? Harrington hurried Malik through the back of the alley, weaving between dumpsters and rusted fire escapes until they emerged on a quieter street. The boy struggled to keep up with his long strides, but Harrington didn't let go of his hand. It wasn't kindness, it was urgency. By the time they stopped, they were several blocks away. The city noise had dimmed, replaced by the faint hum of a broken streetlight. Harrington finally crouched down to face Malik, his suit jacket torn, his once pristine tie hanging loose. "You can't tell anyone about this," Harrington whispered, his eyes darting around as though shadows were listening. "Not your mother, not your friends. Nobody." Malik frowned. "Why? They tried to hurt you. Don't the police need to know?" That innocent question pierced Harrington deeper than the knife had. He looked into Malik's eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Real, unfiltered honesty. And it scared him. Because Harrington's world was built on secrets, on lies, on deals made in the dark. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick black wallet. From it, he slipped a card with his name embossed in gold. "If you ever need anything," he said, handing it to Malik, "you call this number day or night, understand?" Malik held the card carefully like it was a ticket to another world. He didn't understand the weight of it yet, but he would. Oh, he would. Suddenly, Harrington froze again. From the corner of the street, a figure appeared. Slow steps, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on them. One of the attackers, or someone worse. "Stay behind me," Harrington whispered. But Malik, clutching his ball tighter, whispered back, "No, I can help." And right there, under the weak glow of that broken light, the billionaire realized something terrifying. He wasn't the only one with secrets. This 6-year-old boy wasn't ordinary. He carried a spark, a fire that didn't come from money or privilege. Something else was shaping him. Something Harrington couldn't quite place, but would soon learn. The stranger drew closer. Harrington's pulse raced. Malik's tiny fingers curled tighter around the ball. And just as the figure's face came into view, let me ask you, if you were Harrington, would you trust this mysterious man? Or run? And more importantly, if you were Malik, would you keep protecting a billionaire you barely knew or walk away before his secrets dragged you into danger? The street was eerily quiet now, but quiet in Chicago didn't mean safe. Even as Mr. Harrington gripped Malik's hand, the chill of the evening wrapped around them like a warning. Every flicker of neon, every passing car headlight, seemed like a potential threat. They had escaped the alley, yes, but that didn't mean they were free. Not yet. Malik's small feet pounded against the pavement, trying to match Harrington's long strides. The boy's heart raced. He didn't fully understand the danger, but instinct screamed at him, "Run, keep moving, don't look back." And yet, his curiosity burned. Why was this man worth billions walking alone in a dark alley? Why hadn't anyone been there to protect him? And most importantly, why was he now holding Malik's hand as if the boy mattered? Harrington was silent at first, his eyes scanning every shadow, every alleyway entrance. Every sound made him flinch. Distant laughter, a truck's engine starting, even the scurrying of a rat. He knew the attackers weren't far behind, and he feared worse. The syndicate he had crossed wasn't going to let a simple ambush slide. The boy who saved him had unknowingly stepped into a world far more dangerous than his own neighborhood had ever prepared him for. "This way," Harrington finally whispered, tugging Malik toward a narrow side street. "There's a safe spot a few blocks ahead. You stay close, all right?" Malik nodded, though his small fingers tightened around his ball. He wasn't just scared, he was ready. Ready to act, ready to protect, ready to do whatever it took to keep the man alive. And as they moved, the city seemed to close in around them, the towering apartment buildings casting long, menacing shadows, the faint hum of traffic turning into a haunting echo. Then, from behind a chain-link fence, came a sudden noise, a clatter of metal. Harrington froze, pressing himself against the wall. Malik ducked instinctively. Both held their breaths, hearts hammering in sync. A figure emerged. At first, Harrington thought it was one of the attackers, but it wasn't. It was a homeless man, dirty, unshaven but calm, almost knowing. He tilted his head at them as if studying them, and then gestured toward a hidden alleyway. "Follow me," the man said. His voice was low but confident. "I know where you'll be safe." Harrington hesitated. He had money, power, security, but nothing prepared him for trust like this. A stranger in the middle of the night, offering help, and his instinct screamed danger. But Malik, ever curious and fearless, tugged at his hand. "We have to," the boy whispered. "We can't stop now." Reluctantly, Harrington followed. The alley the homeless man led them into was tight, barely wide enough for the two of them side by side. Garbage cans lined the walls, broken bottles glinting like teeth. But it also had one advantage: they were hidden. For now, the night swallowed their footprints. As they moved deeper into the shadowed path, Harrington glanced at Malik. The boy's face was pale, but determined. The red ball clutched to his chest was no longer a toy. It was a weapon, a symbol, a lifeline. Harrington realized something he hadn't admitted to himself. Without Malik, he might already be dead. They reached the end of the alley, and the homeless man stopped. "You're close," he said. "Just a few more blocks. Don't make a sound, don't look back. They'll be watching." Harrington's stomach twisted. The words "they'll be watching" weren't just a warning, they were a threat. He knew the syndicate's reach was long. His enemies had eyes everywhere. Cameras, spies, insiders in his own company. And now, Malik had unwittingly been pulled into it. He glanced down at the boy. "Malik, listen to me. No matter what happens, you stay quiet, you stay close. Do you understand?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I won't let them hurt you," he said. Harrington felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't just bravery he saw in Malik. It was trust. The kind of trust that money couldn't buy, that power couldn't command. And for the first time he realized he might be powerless not because of wealth, but because of heart. Suddenly a sharp sound echoed, like a snapping branch. Harrington's head snapped up. Figures emerged from the shadows, moving fast. The attackers had found them. Or worse, someone else entirely. Harrington shoved Malik behind him. The boy crouched low, clutching his ball like a grenade. Harrington scanned the dark street, trying to make sense of how many there were, which way they were coming, how fast they could act. Then the first figure spoke, a calm, menacing voice. "Harrington." The billionaire froze. That voice, he knew it. It wasn't one of the alley thugs. It was someone else, someone he had hoped never to see again. A man who had been quietly undermining him for months, making deals, spreading rumors, setting traps. And now, he was here in person. Malik shifted slightly, trying to peek around Harrington. The man's eyes caught the boy's movement. Harrington tightened his grip on Malik's shoulder. "Stay down," he whispered. But Malik didn't stay down. He clutched his red ball, his little jaw set with determination. "You can't hurt him," he shouted, voice cracking but firm. The man froze, and for a split second Harrington thought maybe the boy had scared him. But then the man smiled, a thin, sharp smile. "You're braver than I thought," he said. "But bravery doesn't save you tonight." Harrington felt a surge of panic. He looked at Malik, then at the approaching figure. He had trained for corporate battles, for boardrooms, for hostile takeovers. Nothing had prepared him for this, and he realized, with a sickening clarity, that he might have underestimated just how deep the danger ran and how high the stakes had climbed. Malik's eyes were locked on the man. "I can stop you," the boy said, holding the ball out like a shield. The man chuckled. A 6-year-old? But Harrington knew better. He knew what he had seen in Malik's eyes in the alley. That fire, that courage. It wasn't ordinary. And right now, it was the only thing standing between him and the man who had come to settle a score. And then, just as the stranger took a step closer, a sound shattered the tense night. A car horn blared loudly, lights flashed, and shadows danced across the street. Someone else was here. Someone unexpected. Harrington turned toward the sound, Malik gripping his hand tightly. And in that instant he realized that the fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, strategy, and whether a 6-year-old could truly make a difference in a world filled with grown men who played by deadly rules. Now I want you to think about this. If you were Harrington, would you risk your life for the child who saved you, knowing your enemies were closing in? And if you were Malik, would you stand your ground against a man who could destroy you both? Or would you run and hide? The next few minutes could change everything. The car horn blared like a warning shot, its echo bouncing between the brick walls of the narrow street. Malik's grip on Harrington's hand tightened. His small body trembled, but his eyes never left the man stepping out of the shadows. The rival smirked. Always running, Harrington. Always hiding behind someone. Even a child now? Harrington swallowed hard. His chest heaved, breath heavy from both fear and adrenaline. He had spent his life battling titans in boardrooms, yet standing here in the Chicago night, with a 6-year-old holding on to him, he felt stripped of all armor. The car rolled forward slowly, headlights slicing through the dark. Harrington squinted. It wasn't one of his guards. It wasn't police. No sirens, no backup. Just a beat-up sedan with a dented hood, crawling toward them like a predator circling prey. Malik whispered, "Do you think they're here to help us?" Harrington couldn't answer. His gut said no. His instincts screamed danger. The rival's voice cut through the moment. "You should have stayed out of this city, Harrington. You built towers in glass and steel, but you forgot what happens in the alleys. This boy won't save you twice." The words stabbed Harrington deeper than any knife. He looked at Malik. This child, this stranger who had already given him more loyalty than most men in his empire. Harrington knew the rival was right about one thing. Malik's bravery had limits. He was 6. He should have been home, playing, sleeping, living in innocence. Yet here he stood, shielding a billionaire like a soldier. The car stopped a few feet away. Its headlights blinded them, making the figures inside hard to see. A door creaked open. Out stepped another man, taller, bulkier, his coat hanging heavy like it concealed something deadly. Malik raised his red ball. His tiny arm shook, but his spirit didn't. "Don't come closer," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls with a power beyond his years. The rival chuckled. "What are you going to do? Throw that toy at me again?" But Harrington knew better. That ball wasn't a toy anymore. It was proof. Proof that courage doesn't always come in the form of money or muscle. Sometimes it comes in the hands of a child who refuses to back down. Still, Harrington couldn't let Malik fight his battle. He stepped forward, shielding the boy, his voice stern. "If you want me, then take me. But leave him out of this." The rival sneered. "Noble words, Harrington, but you forget. Witnesses are liabilities." His gaze shifted to Malik. "And this one? He's dangerous." Malik's heart pounded so loud he thought they could hear it. Dangerous? Him? He was just a boy from the projects with nothing but his red ball. Yet here was a man, powerful and cruel, treating him like a threat. Harrington's fists clenched. He had faced men with billions at stake, but never had he felt stakes this high. Malik's life wasn't a number. It wasn't a line on a balance sheet. It was real, and Harrington couldn't lose him. Suddenly a sound cut through the tense standoff. Not from the rival, not from the sedan, but from behind them. The homeless man who had led them here appeared again, holding something in his hand, a battered cell phone glowing faintly. "Cops are on their way," he said calmly. "You've got minutes, maybe less." The rival's face twisted in anger. He gestured toward the car. "Finish this, now." The taller man reached into his coat. Malik gasped, clutching his ball tighter. Harrington grabbed the boy's shoulders, shoving him behind a dumpster for cover. His own body shook. He wasn't trained for this. He didn't carry weapons. All he had was instinct and desperation. The taller man pulled something out. Cold metal gleamed under the headlights. And then, boom! The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was the dumpster rattling violently. Malik, crouched behind it, had slammed his ball against the metal wall with all his strength. The loud crash echoed like thunder, startling the taller man for just 1 second. 1 second. But in fights like this, a second can change everything. The rival spun around. "Grab him!" Malik's eyes widened. Harrington reached for him, but the taller man was already moving fast. And that's where I need you, audience. What would you do if you were in Harrington's shoes? Stand and fight with nothing but your bare hands, or grab the child and run into the unknown, risking being hunted down later? Harrington will have to make that choice, and either path could cost him everything. The night after the alley attack, the mansion stood quiet. Too quiet. Outside, the moon hung low, throwing pale light across the manicured lawns. Inside, security lights blinked red and green, signaling that the place was under watch. Yet, silence itself can be the biggest warning, because silence means something is waiting to be broken. James, the billionaire whose life had been snatched from the edge of death by a 6-year-old boy's incredible throw, paced across his study. His tie hung loose, his sleeves rolled up. The old mahogany shelves behind him glowed faintly in lamplight, but his eyes weren't on the books. They were fixed on the window, the glass reflecting both the moonlight and his unsettled face. Every step he took was heavy. He had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, but that night he felt powerless. The attack wasn't just about robbery, it had been targeted. Those men weren't random thugs. They knew who he was. And what shook him even more was how close he'd come to dying, and how his survival now rested on the unexpected bravery of a child. Down the hall, little Marcus slept. He clutched the same rubber ball that had knocked the attacker senseless in the alley. His tiny chest rose and fell gently as if he didn't carry the weight of what had just happened. James had insisted Marcus stay at the mansion for safety. The boy had no father figure. His mother worked double shifts, and James couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were now tangled by fate. But fate, as always, has sharp edges. At exactly midnight, one of the security monitors blinked black for half a second. A glitch, maybe. The guard on duty barely noticed, but in that sliver of time a shadow slipped through the outer gate. A figure, tall and cloaked in dark fabric, moved with precision, like someone who had studied the grounds for weeks. Inside, James poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid trembling in his hand. He told himself he was imagining things, that the unease was just leftover adrenaline. But then, a faint sound echoed through the mansion. Not footsteps, not a door. Just a creak, soft as a whisper, carried through the air vents. His pulse quickened. He set the glass down, reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a small handgun he hadn't touched in years. The billionaire world had bodyguards and contracts, but in that moment none of them mattered. It was just him, the house, and the unsettling feeling that danger was already inside. Meanwhile, Marcus stirred in his sleep. His dreams, innocent and sweet, gave way to shadows chasing him down an endless alley. He gripped his ball tighter, as though it were more than a toy. It was his weapon, his shield, his proof that even the small could strike down the powerful. His eyelids fluttered. Something outside his window made him turn in bed, and then came the noise again. A floorboard groaned, not from Marcus, not from James, from the hall. James stepped out of his study, gun raised, his heart pounding like a war drum. He whispered Marcus's name, half hoping the boy had woken up and was padding down the corridor. No answer. Just silence. And then he saw, at the end of the hallway stood a figure. A mask covered their face, silver under the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Their posture was calm, steady, not like someone caught off guard, but like someone who wanted to be seen. James froze. His throat went dry. The masked visitor tilted their head, then raised a single finger to their lips, signaling silence. A move so deliberate, so confident, it sent shivers through James's spine. "Who are you?" James demanded, his voice cracking louder than intended. No reply. The masked figure simply stepped back, melting into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of their presence. James rushed forward, gun aimed, but by the time he reached the corner, the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no trace. The mansion felt haunted, like it was holding its breath. Back in the bedroom, Marcus woke fully. He rubbed his eyes and whispered, "Mr. James." But the silence that answered him only deepened his unease. Something inside the boy told him he wasn't the only child in this story anymore. Because sometimes enemies wear masks not to hide their faces, but to hide the fact that they are closer than you ever imagined. James returned to Marcus's room, his face pale, his body trembling. He locked the door, sat at the edge of the bed, and told the boy it was nothing. Just a bad dream. But his own eyes betrayed him. Marcus saw it. The fear, the secret, the suspicion that tonight was only the beginning. And while the mansion fell back into silence, the question lingered. Was the masked visitor a threat or a warning? The story had already taken one sharp twist in the alley, but now, with a faceless figure haunting their steps, both James and Marcus were being pulled deeper into something neither of them asked for. But neither of them could escape. And maybe, just maybe, the boys' ball wasn't the only weapon fate had chosen for this fight. What do you think? Was the masked visitor one of the men from the alley, back to finish the job? Or was it someone closer to James, hiding a secret so big it could break everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments because the truth begins to surface and trust will shatter. The mansion woke slowly but uneasily, as though the walls themselves remembered what had happened the night before. Sunlight streamed through wide glass panes, but it brought no comfort, only the harsh truth that some nightmares don't fade with morning. James sat at the breakfast table, untouched coffee steaming in front of him. His phone buzzed nonstop, business calls, urgent emails, stock alerts. But none of it mattered. His mind was stuck on the masked visitor. The silence, the finger to the lips, the way they disappeared like smoke. Across from him, Marcus devoured a bowl of cereal, swinging his little legs under the chair. To him, breakfast was still an adventure. Crunching sounds, spilled milk, laughter that came too easily. Yet every now and then he'd glance at James, his innocent eyes sharp with questions. Children always know when adults are hiding fear. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Was it a ghost? James blinked. What? Last night, Marcus said, dropping his spoon. I saw something outside my window. A shadow. Was it a ghost? James forced a smile, the kind adults give when they want to bury the truth. No ghosts, kid. Just dreams. But Marcus shook his head, unconvinced. Dreams don't stare back. The words stabbed James harder than any knife. This child, barely 6 years old, had already faced what grown men would run from. He couldn't dismiss Marcus's instincts. He'd already seen how sharp they were in that alley. Before James could answer, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly chime. It was sharp, loud, deliberate. Both of them froze. The mansion staff wasn't due back yet, and security had strict orders. No visitors without clearance. James rose, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. Through the glass of the tall front door, he saw a figure waiting. Not masked this time. Dressed in a gray suit, clean-cut, polished. But there was something in the man's posture, stiff and rehearsed, that screamed danger. James opened the door only halfway. Yes? The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Harlow, I assume. I represent a private interest group. We've been concerned about your safety after recent events. James's stomach twisted. And how exactly do you know about recent events? The man ignored the question. He stepped forward, but James blocked the way. My employers, the man continued, believe last night was only a taste. You've made enemies, Mr. Harlow. Enemies who don't forgive easily. We can protect you. James narrowed his eyes. At what cost? The smile widened, sharp as broken glass. Everything has a cost. Before James could respond, Marcus's small voice carried across the foyer. I don't like him. The stranger's gaze flicked to the boy. For a fraction of a second, his polished demeanor cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. And then, as quickly as it came, the mask of civility slid back into place. James's grip on the door tightened. He said firmly, We're not interested. The man tilted his head. Think carefully. Declining our offer doesn't just put you at risk, but anyone near you. His eyes landed on Marcus again, deliberately this time. James slammed the door shut. His heart raced. His hands shook. He double-locked the door, then pulled Marcus close. The boy whispered, Why did he look at me like that? James didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the truth was too dangerous. Whoever these men were, they didn't just want his money, they wanted control. And now they knew about Marcus. Later that morning, James called an emergency meeting with his head of security. The cameras had caught the suited visitor, but nothing of the masked intruder from the night before. It was as if the masked figure had never existed. "Whoever they are," James said, "they're watching us, studying us, waiting for me to make the wrong move." The head of security leaned in. "Then you have a decision to make. Do we fight back or run?" James glanced toward the window where Marcus was playing with his ball on the lawn, giggling in the sunlight. The sound should have been comforting, but it only made the weight in his chest heavier. Running might save their lives, but fighting might save their future. That evening, James sat Marcus down in the library. The boy had stacked books taller than himself, pretending they were castle walls. James crouched to his level. "Marcus," he said softly, "what happened in the alley wasn't just luck. You were brave. You were smart. That ball of yours saved us both." Marcus grinned proudly. "Like a superhero." "Yes," James whispered, though his voice cracked. "But superheroes always face bigger battles, and I need you to listen to me very carefully. Things might get dangerous again. You'll hear things, see things, and I'll need you to trust me no matter what." Marcus studied his face, then nodded solemnly. "I trust you. But do you trust me?" The question stopped James cold. Did he? Could he? This was a child, fragile, innocent. And yet, he'd already proven he was stronger than most men James knew. James pulled him into a hug. "Yes, I trust you." But even as he said it, the shadow of doubt loomed. Because trust is the most fragile weapon of all. And that night, as Marcus drifted off to sleep clutching his ball, James stood at the window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere out there, enemies were watching. Somewhere out there, plans were being made. And somewhere closer than either of them realized, betrayal was already taking root. If you were in James's shoes, would you take the offer of protection, even if it meant selling your soul to dangerous men? Or would you stand and fight, risking everything, including a child's safety? Comment your choice below, because decision will finally be forced on him, and the cost will be unbearable. The mansion was never truly quiet again. Not after the knock at the door, not after the warning wrapped in polished words. James could feel it in the air, the weight of invisible eyes pressing down on him. Even when the guards patrolled the grounds, even when cameras blinked in every corner, there was always the sense that someone was one step ahead. Marcus, though only 6, seemed to notice it too. He no longer slept soundly. His laughter still echoed through the halls, but now it carried an edge, as if he were forcing it to cover the silence. He kept his ball closer than ever, as though it wasn't just a toy, but a shield. That morning, James met with his closest confidant, a man named Victor Kane. Victor wasn't just an advisor. He'd been by James's side for years, through corporate wars and boardroom betrayals. A man who had fought in shadows before, one James trusted more than almost anyone. But trust, as James was about to learn, can be a loaded gun. "Victor," James said, lowering his voice in the study, "we're being hunted. I need to know who's behind this. Last night, someone was in the house. This morning, a man in a suit threatened me and made it clear Marcus is a target. I won't let them take him." Victor leaned back, stroking his chin. His gray eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You've built empires, James, but empires attract wolves. This isn't about money, it's about power. Someone wants you broken." James clenched his fists. "Then I'll fight back." Victor's lips curled into a thin smile. That's what they expect. Sometimes survival isn't about striking. It's about vanishing. If you leave the city for a while, regroup, I can keep things afloat. James shook his head. "I can't run. Not with Marcus. He's just a child. Uprooting him, dragging him into hiding. He deserves better." Victor's gaze softened briefly. "You care for him." "I owe him my life," James admitted. "And maybe more than that. He's shown me something I'd forgotten. Courage without calculation. Heart without agenda. Victor studied him silently, and in that silence something shifted. James didn't notice it. How Victor's jaw tightened, how his hand gripped the armrest just a little too hard. That evening, the first real crack appeared. James left Marcus in the library with a guard, instructing him to stay close. The boy was building towers out of books again, his imagination creating kingdoms where villains were easy to spot. But real villains rarely wear capes. Meanwhile, James met with his legal team downstairs. They argued over contracts, strategies, and damage control. It was all noise to him. His mind kept drifting back upstairs, back to the boy who had become his anchor in the storm. Halfway through the meeting, the guard stormed in, pale as chalk. "Sir, Marcus is gone." The room fell silent. Papers froze mid-air. "What do you mean, gone?" James roared, slamming the table. The library window was open. The lock was cut. He was there 1 minute, gone the next. James's heart thundered. He sprinted through the halls, shouting Marcus's name. The mansion erupted in chaos, guards scattering, alarms blaring, cameras rewinding footage. And then, one guard shouted, "Sir, we've got movement on the east lawn." James bolted outside. Under the glow of the security lights, he saw a figure hurrying across the grass, carrying something small. For a terrifying moment, he thought it was Marcus. He raised his gun, then froze. The figure turned, dropping the hood. It was Marcus himself, dirt on his face, ball clutched tightly in one hand, tears streaking his cheeks. James rushed to him, kneeling. "Marcus, what happened? Who took you?" The boy sobbed into his chest. "It was him, the man you trust, the one with the gray eyes." James stiffened. "Victor." Before James could react, headlights flared at the far end of the lawn. A black SUV roared to life, tires chewing gravel. Inside, James caught a glimpse of Victor's face through the tinted glass, calm, unhurried, as if betrayal were just another part of business. The SUV sped away, disappearing into the night. James held Marcus tightly, his fury boiling into something raw. The man he'd trusted with everything, his company, his secrets, his survival, had just crossed the line. And the boy's life had been the pawn. Inside the mansion, the alarms quieted, but the silence that followed was heavier than ever. James poured a glass of water for Marcus, kneeling beside him. "You're safe now. I promise. No one will take you again." But Marcus shook his head, clutching his ball tighter. "He said something before I ran. He said, the mask was only the beginning." James froze. The masked visitor, the suit at the door, Victor's betrayal. They weren't separate threats, they were chapters of the same story. And now James knew with bone-deep certainty that the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. That night, as Marcus finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, James stood alone in the darkened study. His reflection in the glass looked nothing like the man who once cared only for numbers and power. This was a man stripped raw, forced to choose between survival and vengeance. And deep inside, a question gnawed at him. If Victor, his most trusted ally, had turned, who else might already be against him? Because betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones you let closest. What do you think drove Victor to betray James? Was it money, jealousy, or something even darker? Something tied to the masked figure and their warning? Drop your theory in the comments, because James decides whether to chase Victor or prepare for an even bigger war. The night after Victor's betrayal was the longest of James Callahan's life. He sat awake in the study, curtains drawn, the city lights flickering faintly through the cracks. The bourbon in his glass was untouched. His mind was a storm. Rage for Victor, fear for Marcus, and the gnawing memory of the warning. The mask was only the beginning. Down the hall, Marcus slept restlessly, his small hands still curled around that red ball. Even in his dreams, the boy clung to the only weapon he had ever known. Every now and then, he whimpered, and James would rise from his chair, step into the doorway, and listen until the boy settled again. That child had saved him once, and James would burn the earth to keep him safe now. But the question kept stabbing through his mind. Who was behind all this? Victor had been bought or threatened, but by whom? By dawn, James made a decision. He called in his remaining loyal men and gave them an order. Find Victor. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. Bring him to me alive. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Victor wasn't just another suit. He knew the inner workings of the empire, the cracks in the armor, the blind spots of security. Hunting him down wouldn't be easy. But they nodded. Orders were orders. As the day wore on, James tried to distract Marcus with games, with stories, even with ice cream from the kitchen. The boy smiled, but it was faint, half-hearted. He wasn't fooled. He knew the danger hadn't passed. And then it happened. Late that evening, as the sun slipped below the Chicago skyline, the doorbell rang. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, slow and deliberate, echoing through the mansion like a countdown. James's chest tightened. He ordered the guards to hold their positions. He walked to the door himself, heart pounding, and opened it. No one was there. Only a small box sat on the step, plain, wrapped in brown paper, a note taped to the top. James bent down slowly, picked it up, and carried it into the study. He told Marcus to stay back, but the boy followed anyway, clutching his ball like a soldier with a shield. James opened the box. Inside, neatly folded, was a black mask, the same kind worn by the visitor weeks before. And beneath it, a photograph. James froze. It was a picture of Marcus, taken at the playground 2 days earlier. His throat went dry. Someone had been watching them, close enough to take photos, close enough to slip a box onto his doorstep without being caught. He read the note aloud, voice shaking. The boy is ours. The mask was only the first warning. You can't protect him forever. Marcus's face went pale. His little body trembled, but he didn't cry. He whispered, "They were there. When I was playing?" James swallowed hard, kneeling beside him. "Yes. But listen to me. They won't touch you. Not while I'm breathing." The boy nodded, his jaw tightening, the fire of defiance flickering in his young eyes. But James knew the truth. Every layer of security, every camera, every lock meant nothing if the enemy was already inside his circle. That night he doubled the guards, locked every window, sealed every gate. Still the unease grew. The photograph was more than a threat. It was a message. Whoever was behind the mask didn't just want money. They wanted control. And Marcus was the lever. The following morning, James gathered his inner circle, those he still trusted. They met in the grand dining hall, where the chandeliers hung heavy and silent. He laid the photograph on the table. "This isn't just about me anymore," James said, his voice hard. "They want the boy. That means they're willing to destroy anything, anyone to get to him. If we don't strike first, we'll be hunted forever." One of his men leaned forward. "But sir, strike where? We don't even know who they are." James stared at the mask. "Then we find out, and we tear them apart." It was easier said than done. Every lead seemed to vanish into shadows. Calls were intercepted. Informants went silent. And each day, James felt the grip of fear tightening around Marcus's small shoulders. Until, one night, the boy himself broke the silence. "James," Marcus whispered as they sat by the fireplace, "why do they want me?" James looked into his wide, innocent eyes. He didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a child that evil doesn't always have a reason? That sometimes being brave enough to throw a ball in defense of a stranger paints a target on your back forever? He pulled the boy into his arms instead. "Because you matter, and because you're stronger than they know." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's fight back." The words startled James, but in them he heard the echo of a truth he hadn't wanted to face. This wasn't just his war anymore. It was theirs. Later that night, as the mansion settled into uneasy silence, James checked the perimeter one last time. The guards reported nothing unusual. The cameras were clear. But when he returned to Marcus's room, his blood turned cold. The red ball, the boy's constant companion, was gone. On the windowsill lay another note. This one read, "The game has already begun." Who do you think stole Marcus's ball and left that message? Was it Victor, working from the shadows? Or has someone even closer to James betrayed him again? The hunter finally becomes the hunted. The air inside the safe house was suffocating. Every ticking second felt like it was echoing through the walls. Nina sat at the edge of a worn-out couch, her hands trembling as she clutched the burner phone. She had replayed the last message at least 10 times already, each time convincing herself it was a trap, yet also believing it was their only chance. The message had been simple, direct. Meet me at the old freight yard. Midnight. Come alone. Answers. It didn't say who sent it. But deep down, Nina knew. There was only one person bold enough to call her out like that. One person who could dangle the truth just far enough out of reach to make her crawl after it. Jake paced in the shadows, jaw tight, his footsteps heavy with frustration. "It's bait," he growled. "They want you scared. They want you vulnerable. You step foot in that yard and you're theirs." Nina's voice cracked, low but determined. "And what if it's him, Jake? What if it's the proof we've been chasing? The files, the names, the connection that blows all of this wide open? We can't keep running forever." Jake slammed his palm against the wall, rattling a frame that hung crooked. "Running keeps you alive, Nina. Stepping into their spotlight, that's suicide." But Nina didn't flinch. She had lost too much already. Her badge, her freedom, and nearly her sanity. What else could they take? Her voice turned steely. "If it's a trap, then we spring it. On our terms." By 11:30, the night had thickened into a suffocating silence. The safe house seemed smaller, as if the walls themselves were warning her not to go. But Nina was already dressed, jacket zipped, pistol holstered at her side. She glanced at Jake, who leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her like a man waiting for the inevitable. "You're not going alone," he said finally. "You heard the message?" she shot back. Jake smirked, bitter. "When have I ever followed the rules?" Nina almost smiled, but it faded fast. They both knew what was at stake. The freight yard wasn't just another meeting place. It was where it all began. Years ago, that's where she'd made her first arrest that tied her to this entire mess. Where she'd thought she'd won. Where she'd been wrong. They arrived just before midnight. The yard was a wasteland of rusting metal and half-collapsed sheds, the kind of place that reeked of forgotten sins. The night was cold and the fog rising off the tracks curled around their ankles like smoke from an unseen fire. Jake whispered, "Eyes up, this place is a coffin." Nina's flashlight cut a thin beam through the dark, slicing over stacks of old cargo crates. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every sound stretched into something sinister. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Then a voice. "Detective." It was soft, almost taunting, echoing across the empty yard. Nina spun, gun raised, the light catching movement near an old crane. A figure stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the hood of a long coat. Jake tensed beside her. "You've got about 3 seconds to show us your face." The figure chuckled, low, familiar. And when he finally pulled the hood back, Nina's breath caught in her throat. It was him, Marcus, the man she had once trusted, the partner who had vanished years ago, the ghost who had left her to carry the weight of everything. Her grip faltered on the gun, emotions warring with rage. "You," she whispered. Marcus tilted his head, smirking. "Miss me?" Jake stepped forward, gun steady, but Nina's voice stopped him. "Why now, Marcus? Why drag me out here?" Marcus's eyes glimmered under the dim yard lights. "Because the game's almost over, And I thought you deserved to see the board before the final move. From his coat pocket, he pulled a flash drive, holding it between two fingers like it was nothing more than a coin. This, he said, is the truth. Everything you've been chasing. But he let the word hang in the night air like a knife. It comes with a price. Nina's stomach knotted. She wanted to believe him, but every instinct screamed this was another play, another test of how far she'd go. Jake's voice was low, venomous. Don't listen. He's stringing you along, like always. Marcus chuckled again, eyes fixed on Nina. Tell me, detective, how badly do you really want the truth? The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then headlights flared at the far end of the yard. A black SUV rolled in slow, deliberate, its engine growling like a predator closing in on prey. Another followed, then another. Jake cursed under his breath. Ambush! Nina's heart pounded as she turned back to Marcus, but he was already stepping away, vanishing into the shadows. The truth's waiting, he called back, his voice fading with every step. If you survive tonight. The SUVs screeched to a halt, doors flying open, armed men spilling out with rifles gleaming under the floodlights. Jake grabbed Nina's arm. We're not fighting our way out of this. But Nina's gaze stayed locked on the shadows where Marcus had disappeared. The flash drive. The truth. The one thing she couldn't let slip away again. Her mind raced. She could run, hide, live to fight another day. Or she could chase Marcus into the jaws of whatever nightmare he had prepared for her. And then, the first gunshot cracked the night. Pinned down, surrounded, and torn between the truth and survival. Nina faces the deadliest decision of her life, but tell me, if you were in her shoes, would you run from the gunfire, or run toward the man who betrayed you? Where the real test begins. The crack of gunfire split the night like lightning. Sparks flew as bullets tore into the metal crates around them, the deafening echoes bouncing through the freight yard. Nina ducked instinctively, dragging Jake down with her behind a stack of rusted barrels. The sharp tang of gunpowder filled the air, acrid and suffocating. Move, Nina! Jake barked, shoving her further into cover as another round pinged off the barrels. They're trying to box us in. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Shadows darted across the floodlights, the armed men spreading out in a perfect arc. They weren't amateurs. They were trained, coordinated, and closing fast. Nina clenched her jaw. We need to get to Marcus. Jake's eyes widened like she'd lost her mind. Marcus, he set this whole thing up. You're still thinking about chasing him while they're trying to fill us with lead? Nina's voice cut like steel. He has the truth, and if we don't get it, all of this, everything we've lost, means nothing. Bullets whined past them, ricocheting with ear-splitting shrieks. Jake cursed, firing off 2 quick shots around the corner to keep the gunmen back. Fine, but we're not dying for your ghost of a partner. We move now. They sprinted low across the open ground, weaving between crates as the enemy fire tracked them. A spotlight snapped on from one of the SUVs, bathing the yard in harsh white light. Jake raised his gun and squeezed off a round, shattering the bulb in a shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed them again, but only for a heartbeat. Nina's foot caught on a loose chain, nearly sending her sprawling, but Jake yanked her upright before the next volley shredded the ground where she had fallen. They dove behind an overturned forklift, panting, adrenaline pushing their bodies past exhaustion. Nina pressed her back against the cold steel, fumbling for her radio. Call for backup, she hissed. Jake's laugh was bitter. Backup? You think anyone's coming for us? We're ghosts, Nina. You burned those bridges the second you went rogue. The words stung, but she shoved them aside. She couldn't afford to feel. Not now. Then we fight our way through, she said firmly, racking her pistol again. We get to Marcus before he vanishes for good. Gunfire shredded the forklift, sparks raining down. The barrels clanged as bullets ripped through them, spraying oily mist into the air. Nina grabbed Jake's arm. Left side, there's a maintenance tunnel under the tracks. If we can make it. Her words were drowned out by the roar of another SUV pulling closer. Its headlights cut across them, blinding before the vehicle skidded sideways to block their path. The doors burst open. 4 men stepped out, rifles raised, forming a wall of firepower. Jake's voice was a growl. "We're trapped." Nina's mind raced. Every move felt like checkmate. But then she saw it, the crane overhead. A heavy cargo hook swaying slightly in the night breeze, suspended by a chain thick enough to crush steel. She pointed. "The hook, shoot it." Jake didn't hesitate. He aimed high and squeezed the trigger. The chain snapped with a metallic scream, the hook plummeting like a meteor. It slammed into the SUV's hood, crushing the engine in an explosion of sparks. The men scattered, shouting in panic. "Go!" Nina shouted, sprinting into the chaos. They raced toward the far end of the yard, weaving through stacks of crates as the firefight raged behind them. Marcus's silhouette flickered in and out of the shadows ahead, always just out of reach, like he was leading them deeper into the trap. Nina's lungs burned, but she pushed harder. Every step, every breath was fueled by the thought of that flash drive in Marcus's pocket. Proof, answers, justice. "Marcus," she screamed into the night. Her voice cracked, desperate. He didn't answer, but he didn't vanish either. Instead, he slowed, just enough to make sure she could see him. Just enough to keep her chasing. Jake caught her arm mid-stride. "Don't! He's dragging you straight into the kill zone." Nina ripped free, eyes blazing. "Then let him. I'm not stopping." They burst into the far yard, a maze of shipping containers stacked like tombstones. The echoes of gunfire grew muffled here, replaced by the eerie groan of shifting metal as the wind rattled the rusted doors. Marcus stood at the center, the floodlights behind him casting his face in shadow. The flash drive glinted between his fingers, taunting, almost theatrical. "You're persistent, detective," he called out, voice carrying across the hollow yard. "That's what I always admired about you. You never knew when to quit." Nina leveled her gun at him, hands trembling. "Hand it over, Marcus. End this." Marcus smirked. "End it. Oh, Nina. This is only the beginning." Before she could answer, a metallic clang echoed from the containers. Then another, and another, the sound of locks snapping open. Jake's stomach dropped. "It's a setup." Container doors flew open in unison, shadows spilling out, dozens of armed men emerging like soldiers from a tomb. Their boots thundered against the concrete, rifles gleaming under the floodlights. Marcus raised the flash drive in the air, like a trophy. "The truth you're chasing? It's right here, but you'll have to earn it." The circle closed fast, rifles aimed at their chests. Jake stepped in front of Nina, teeth gritted. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and he knows it." Nina's grip tightened on her pistol. She wasn't shaking anymore. The fear was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "Then we don't play his game, we make our own." Her eyes darted to the nearest stack of containers, calculating distances, angles, every possible escape route. She knew she couldn't outshoot them, couldn't outrun them. But maybe, just maybe, she could outthink them. Her voice was steady when she whispered to Jake, "When I move, follow me. Don't stop, no matter what." Jake's eyes locked on hers, searching. "What are you planning?" But Nina didn't answer. She just took a deep breath, steadying herself for the impossible. And then she stepped into the open, gun raised, staring Marcus down as the rifles closed in. Surrounded, betrayed, and staring death in the face, Nina is seconds from making the boldest move of her life. But is it courage or madness? Tell me, if you were in that circle, would you surrender? Or would you take the shot that changes everything? Here is where choices turn fatal. The night seemed to hold its breath. 100 rifles locked on Nina, the metallic clicks of chambers cocking echoing like a death march. She stood alone, one woman against a wall of steel, her pistol trembling ever so slightly under the floodlights. Jake's heart hammered as he crouched behind a container, his every instinct screaming to grab her and run. but her words from seconds ago rang in his ears. Don't stop, no matter what. Marcus smiled, slow and deliberate, his eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. He lifted the flash drive, letting the lights catch its silver casing. Here it is, Detective. All your answers. Every truth you've been bleeding for. But it comes with a price. Your life. The men around him tightened their circle. Boots scuffed against the cracked concrete. Fingers tightened on triggers. A dozen barrels rose higher, ready to unleash hell. Nina's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You've already tried to take my life once, Marcus. I'm still standing. So maybe the real price is yours. Marcus chuckled, low and mocking. Still clinging to your illusions of control. That's why you lost everything. That's why you'll lose again. But Nina wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes darted upward, scanning the steel towers of containers around them. She'd noticed something. An old crane's support beam, loose from years of rust and storms, dangling overhead with a weight that could crush a truck. And she made her move. With one sharp pivot, Nina raised her pistol, not at Marcus, not at the men, but at the crane's support. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot sparked off steel. The second one tore through a rusted hinge with a shriek of metal. Then came the sound. The groan of tearing bolts, the moan of a giant waking from sleep. The entire beam shifted, screaming under its own weight. Jake realized what she'd done half a second before it happened. Down, he roared, diving flat to the ground. The support gave way with an ear-splitting crash, and the massive beam slammed into the circle of gunmen. Containers toppled like dominoes, metal shrieking and buckling as men screamed, crushed under the avalanche of steel. Bullets sprayed wild, the line broken in an instant of chaos. Marcus staggered back, barely avoiding the collapse, the flash drive slipping from his hand. It skittered across the concrete, spinning once before vanishing beneath a fallen crate. Nina! Jake scrambled to his feet, grabbing her hand. They bolted through the opening the collapse had created, weaving through dust and debris as chaos erupted behind them. The night was alive with shouts, gunfire, and the groan of shifting containers. Smoke and sparks filled the air, choking and blinding. Every second was a gamble, every step a prayer. But the men weren't giving up. Shadows darted through the haze, rifles cracking. Bullets snapped past their ears, embedding in the steel with sharp pings. Nina dragged Jake toward the far wall, her lungs burning. "The river," she gasped. "If we make it to the docks." Jake cursed, returning fire. "That's a big if, sweetheart." A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. He stumbled, but Nina yanked him up, refusing to let him fall. Behind them, Marcus's voice rose above the chaos, furious and commanding. "Don't let them get away. Bring me her head." They burst out of the yard into the open docks, the black water of the river stretching endless before them. Barges creaked in the distance, the night air thick with the stench of diesel and salt. Jake's legs gave out for a second, blood streaming down his arm. He collapsed against a piling, breathing ragged. Nina knelt beside him, panic flickering in her eyes. "Stay with me, Jake. Just stay with me." He tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "You've got a hell of a way of keeping a guy alive." Nina pressed a trembling hand to his wound, fighting the terror rising in her chest. She couldn't lose him. Not now. The sound of boots on wood snapped her attention back. More men were coming, fast. She searched the dock frantically. Then she saw it. A tugboat, engine idling, its crew nowhere in sight. "On your feet," she whispered fiercely, hauling Jake up despite his protests. "We're not dying here." They stumbled onto the tugboat, Nina slamming the throttle forward as bullets tore into its hull. The engine roared, the vessel lurching into the river with a spray of foam. Gunfire blazed from the dock, sparks flashing across the water. Nina ducked, steering the boat into the fog, weaving between rusted barges and towering freighters. The river swallowed them whole, the chaos of the freight yard fading into echoes behind them. But Nina knew better than to think they were safe. Marcus was still alive. The flash drive was still out there, and the war had only just begun. As the boat cut deeper into the fog, Jake's voice rasped, weak but steady. "Tell me something, Nina. If you'd missed that crane, if it hadn't fallen, what then?" She kept her eyes on the water, her grip white-knuckled on the wheel. "Then we'd already be dead." Silence settled, heavy and bitter. The river stretched endless, the fog closing in like a shroud. And somewhere in the shadows behind them, Marcus's men regrouped. The hunt was far from over. She gambled everything on one impossible shot, and won. But the price of survival is only rising. Outnumbered, hunted, and bleeding, Nina's escape has bought her time, not peace. Do you think she can truly outsmart Marcus forever, or is she only running toward the inevitable? The tugboat's engine groaned, pushing through the fog like a tired beast. Every ripple against the hull sounded louder than it should. Nina's hands were steady on the wheel, but inside she was shaking. Jake lay stretched across a bench, his shirt soaked crimson where the bullet had torn through his shoulder. His face was pale, his breath uneven. "Nina," he whispered, "if I pass out, don't stop." She glanced down at him, her jaw tight. "Don't talk like that. You're not passing out. Not tonight." His smile was faint, almost invisible. "You always were a terrible liar." But there wasn't time for softness. Behind them, faint but closing, came the growl of engines. Marcus wasn't letting them go. Not after she'd humiliated him in front of his men. Not after she'd nearly buried him alive under a mountain of steel. Nina scanned the river ahead. The fog clung low, muting the glow of the city, but she spotted the faint outlines of barges anchored in clusters. If she threaded the tugboat through them, maybe, just maybe, they could lose their pursuers. "Hold on," she muttered, more to herself than Jake. She jerked the wheel, guiding the boat between two looming barges, the space so tight the hull scraped against rusted metal. Behind them, engines roared louder. Gunfire cracked, bullets splashing in the water just feet away. One round shattered a glass pane near Nina's head. She flinched but didn't falter. Jake forced himself up, bracing against the bench. He raised his pistol with his good hand, aiming back into the fog. "They're not backing off," he growled. A muzzle flash lit the mist. Jake fired. One shot, then another. A scream cut through the night, followed by chaos as one of the pursuing boats swerved wide, crashing into the side of a barge. The sound of metal rending against steel echoed like thunder. Nina didn't dare celebrate. Another boat still chased them, faster, stronger. Then from the corner of her eye she saw something that froze her blood. A red light blinking from the underside of their tugboat. "Jake," she choked out, her voice shaking. They planted something. A tracker, or worse. He struggled to focus, his vision blurred from blood loss. "If it's blinking, Nina, it's not just a tracker." Her stomach knotted. That light could mean one thing: explosives. The realization hit like a hammer. Marcus hadn't planned to chase them forever. He planned to herd them, then finish it all in one fiery blast. She had seconds, maybe less. "Nina!" Jake's voice was hoarse but sharp. "Cut the engine now!" She yanked the throttle back. The tugboat shuddered, slowing just as the other vessel burst through the fog, speeding past them. Gunmen on deck opened fire wildly, not realizing their target had stopped. Bullets tore across the water, missing by inches. And then, the tugboat beneath them groaned. The red light blinked faster. Nina's instincts screamed. She dove, dragging Jake with her, leaping off the side of the boat into the freezing river. The world exploded. Fire split the night as the tugboat erupted in a thunderous blast, the shockwave tearing through the fog like a beast unchained. Flames leapt into the air, painting the water orange. Shards of burning debris rained down around them, hissing as they hit the river. Nina fought to surface, gasping for breath, clutching Jake with all the strength she had left. He sputtered, coughing up water, his eyes rolling with the weight of pain. She kicked hard, dragging him away from the inferno. Smoke stung her lungs. The river tasted of oil and blood. But somehow, they were alive. The enemy boat wasn't so lucky. The explosion had rocked it, tossing men overboard. Shouts and screams carried faintly across the water. Chaos gave them cover. Nina pulled Jake toward a half-submerged barge nearby, hauling him up with a strength born only of desperation. They collapsed on the rusted metal, coughing, shivering, broken. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the crackle of fire and the distant cries of Marcus's men filled the night. Jake broke the silence first. His voice was barely more than a rasp. "You saved us." Nina pressed her forehead against the cold steel, her chest heaving. "No, we're just not dead yet." She lifted her head, scanning the flames. The tugboat was gone, torn apart. The flash drive, still lost under the freight yard rubble. Their evidence was gone. And Marcus was still out there. A shadow moved across the water. Nina stiffened. Through the smoke, a figure stood on the deck of another boat. Tall, calm, unshaken. Marcus. His silhouette was clear against the firelight, his coat flaring in the wind. He hadn't chased them blindly into chaos. He had waited, watching, learning. And now, he knew they were still alive. His voice carried across the river, cold and deliberate. "You think you're clever, Nina, but you only delayed what's coming. You can't run forever. I'll burn every river, every alley, every home you hide in. And when you've lost everyone you care about, I'll be there." The boat drifted back into the fog, vanishing as if swallowed whole. Nina's body trembled with exhaustion, but her eyes hardened. His words weren't just a threat. They were a promise. She looked at Jake, bloodied and shaking, his strength slipping away. For the first time, doubt clawed at her. Could she protect him? Could she protect herself? The city lights in the distance flickered faintly like stars barely holding on. They weren't safe, not yet, maybe not ever. But one thing was certain. Marcus had underestimated her once. She wouldn't let it happen again. She leapt into fire and water and survived both. But survival doesn't mean victory. With Marcus watching from the shadows and Jake's life hanging by a thread, how much longer can Nina fight before the cost becomes too great? Would you keep running, or would you turn and face the storm head on? The choice is coming. The river fog clung to Nina's skin, cold and suffocating, as if the night itself was pressing down on her. Every heartbeat was a drum in her ears. Every splash of water against the tugboat debris reminded her she was alive, but barely. Jake leaned against a crate, shivering violently. Blood had stopped flowing from his shoulder for the moment, but she knew it was only a matter of time before his strength failed completely. "We can't stay here," she whispered, though the words felt useless in the vast, empty docks. "We need a plan." Jake's eyes were distant, almost dazed. "Every plan we've had has gone up in flames. Literally." She clenched her fists. "Then we make a new one." Nina had been piecing it together since the explosion. Marcus wasn't just hunting them. He was orchestrating everything to leave her with no choice but to come to him, to surrender the truth willingly. The flash drive, the files, the evidence. Marcus had known she would chase it, no matter the cost. He had manipulated every step of the way, predicting her moves like a chess master who had trapped the queen in an impossible corner. And now she realized there was only one way to end it. Hours passed as they hid among the barges, the distant sounds of Marcus's men searching the docks, cutting through the night like knives. Nina's mind raced. Every escape route had been mapped, every shadow checked, yet none were safe. Finally, she turned to Jake. "We lure him, not run anymore. We give him the one thing he didn't expect." Jake blinked slowly, trying to focus through exhaustion and pain. "You mean, we fight?" "Yes," Nina said, her voice hard, unwavering. "Not just to survive, but to end this. Tonight, it's him, or us." Jake swallowed, nodding. "Then let's do it." They moved quickly, slipping through the maze of barges, finding an abandoned warehouse that Marcus had likely overlooked. The building was old, crumbling in places, but it had height, multiple exits, and plenty of shadows to hide in. Inside, they set their trap. Crates were stacked strategically, metal beams aligned with rope pulleys, the warehouse rigged to collapse certain sections on command. It was risky, terrifying, but it was the only way to face Marcus on their own terms. Jake whispered as he checked the last pulley. "If this goes wrong, we're dead." Nina didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was already calculating angles, fire paths, escape routes, every scenario Marcus might try to use against them. The night stretched, heavy with anticipation. Then came the sound of the engines, the same guttural roar they had heard on the river. Marcus had found them. Nina's stomach knotted, adrenaline spiking as shadows moved along the warehouse walls. The first of his men appeared, rifles raised, but the chaos inside was already beginning. Nina's signal sent beams crashing down, forcing them to scatter. Sparks flew, crates toppled, metal clanged. It was organized chaos, their own fight playing out like a brutal dance. Marcus entered last, calm as ever, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Detective," he said, voice slow, deliberate. "I knew you'd come. I've been waiting." Nina raised her pistol, aiming directly at him. "It ends tonight, Marcus." He laughed. "You think you've finally gained the upper hand? You still don't understand. I control the board." Gunfire erupted again, ricocheting off the steel beams and crates. Nina and Jake fought like cornered wolves, taking advantage of every shadow, every stacked crate, every advantage they could find. Then, chaos. A section of the warehouse roof, weakened and rigged by Nina earlier, collapsed under a carefully timed weight, trapping a group of Marcus's men under tons of metal and crates. Screams echoed, bullets ricocheted, and for a moment, the tide turned. Marcus's face twisted in anger, but he stayed calm, assessing, calculating. He knew he had one shot left. Nina kept her eyes locked on him, heart hammering. She knew she couldn't just outgun him. She had to outthink him. Every move, every feint, every sound in the warehouse became part of her strategy. And then she saw it, the flash drive, still clutched in Marcus's hand. This was her chance. She lunged, dodging his reach and striking with precision. A brief struggle, a flash of movement, and the drive flew from his hand, landing safely behind a stack of crates. Marcus snarled, advancing toward her with a blade. Nina felt the weight of the night crash down on her. This was it. Jake intercepted, tackling Marcus just as he swung. The two men crashed to the ground, grappling violently. Nina seized the moment, racing toward the flash drive, snatching it up like the prize it was. Marcus roared in frustration, scrambling to his feet, only to find Nina already behind another stack of crates, gun raised, eyes blazing. "Enough," she shouted, voice echoing. "It ends here. You lose." For the first time, Marcus faltered. He realized he had underestimated her, miscalculated. The tables had finally turned. And then, the warehouse lights flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed them all. Gunshots echoed. Metal screeched. Footsteps ran. In that instant, Nina knew the final move was coming. She's cornered Marcus, snatched the truth, and turned the tables. But the night isn't over. Will Nina survive the final chaos, or will Marcus escape to strike again? How far would you go to face someone who's destroyed everything you love? The ultimate reckoning. Darkness wrapped the warehouse like a cloak, broken only by flickers of fire from toppled crates and sparks raining from broken beams. Nina crouched behind the stack of steel, flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, every breath sharp in the night air. Marcus's silhouette moved through the shadows, slow and deliberate, his blade glinting faintly. He had survived the chaos, adapted to every trap, and now he was coming for her. Jake groaned behind her, leaning against a crate, blood seeping through his shirt. His shoulder was worse than before, but he lifted his pistol, determined to protect her at all costs. Nina's voice was low, sharp, steady. We finish this tonight. No more running. The distance between them closed with every second. Marcus advanced, confident, a predator circling its prey. His eyes glinted, calculating. You've had your fun, Nina. But this ends here. Tonight, your story dies. She didn't flinch. She tightened her grip on her pistol, her other hand brushing against the ropes she'd rigged throughout the warehouse. Every plan she had been crafting since they'd escaped the river funneled into this one moment. You don't get to say that, she replied evenly. I'm done being your target. Marcus laughed, low and menacing, stepping over debris, never once faltering. Bold words for someone backed into a corner. The first move was his. Marcus lunged, swinging the blade with precision. Nina fired her pistol instinctively. The bullet ricocheted off steel. Sparks flew. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a lethal strike. Jake scrambled, tackling one of Marcus's remaining men who had appeared from the shadows, and a violent scuffle erupted. Nina's heart raced. Her mind mapped every move, every angle, every escape before it happened. She saw the rope she had tied across the beams, perfectly positioned to collapse the central section of the warehouse. One pull, one cut, and it would pin Marcus long enough to end it. Marcus blocked another shot and advanced, fury flashing across his face. You think you're clever, don't you? He snarled. You're still too small to stop me. Nina's pulse pounded, but she held her ground. Size doesn't matter. Strategy does. And tonight, I'm smarter than you. With a deep breath, she pulled the rope, releasing the precariously balanced steel beam. The warehouse trembled as the beam swung down with thunderous force. Marcus's eyes widened in realization, but it was too late. The beam crashed into a stack of crates, pinning his legs and tossing him backward. Sparks flew and he let out a scream of fury. Jake recovered, dragging himself up beside Nina, blood running down his arm. You did it, he gasped. Not yet, she snapped. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, struggling beneath the beam. She needed to secure the flash drive. Every second counted. Marcus wriggled, snarling, striking wildly with his blade, but he couldn't free himself. Nina raised her pistol, aiming carefully. It's over, Marcus. Give up. It's done. For a long moment he glared at her, pride and rage battling in his eyes. Then he realized he had lost. The tension broke with the sound of approaching sirens. The distant wail grew louder as police vehicles converged on the docks. Marcus's remaining men surrendered or fled, knowing their night was over. Nina lowered her weapon, exhaling a shaky breath. Jake slumped against her, exhaustion and relief washing over him. We survived, he whispered. Yes, Nina replied, voice barely audible, her hands still trembling from adrenaline. We did. She picked up the flash drive from the floor, turning it over in her hands. The truth it held, the proof of corruption, manipulation, and lies, was finally safe. And Marcus? He would face justice, legally this time, not just by her hand. Hours later, as dawn crept over the horizon, the warehouse was quiet. The fire had died down, leaving smoke curling into the early light. Nina sat on a crate, Jake leaning against her, both battered, but alive. Police officers secured the area, taking statements and collecting evidence. The flash drive was handed over and Marcus, furious but contained, was led away in handcuffs. Nina watched the city awaken across the river, its lights fading in the morning sun. She felt something she hadn't in months, relief, satisfaction, the calm after a storm. Jake's voice broke the silence. So, what now? Nina looked at him, tired but determined. Now, we rebuild. Not just for us, but for everyone affected by Marcus and his network. We make sure the truth is heard. No one else will be caught in the trap he set for us. Jake nodded. And us? She smiled faintly. We live. We survive. And maybe we find some peace. The city hummed below them, indifferent and unknowing, but for Nina and Jake, the weight of survival and victory was enough. The night had tested them beyond fear, beyond pain. A city had been threatened, lives nearly destroyed, and yet, in the face of impossible odds, courage, strategy, and unrelenting willpower carried them through. Nina didn't just survive Marcus. She outsmarted him. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that the smallest, sharpest minds can topple giants. But here's the question for you, viewer. When the world corners you, when every path seems blocked and danger closes in, do you run or do you fight? Nina chose to fight. What would you do? The warehouse emptied, the fog lifted, and the river settled into calm once more. The flash drive contained the evidence that would change countless lives. Marcus was behind bars, and Nina and Jake had earned a victory born from courage, intelligence, and sheer survival instinct. And though scars remained, physical, emotional, and mental, they were proof that even when surrounded by darkness, one can create light, one can turn the tide, one can face the storm and win. If Nina's courage gave you chills and Jake's loyalty inspired you, hit that like button and show your support. Don't forget to subscribe to Top Core for more gripping American stories that reveal the courage, the struggles, and the truths behind every life-changing moment. And here's a question for you. If you were in Nina's shoes, would you run or fight? Comment below and let us know. Your voice might inspire the next story we share.